what I wanted to start with was a little bit of a story, something I was reading the other day, and it really sort of crystallized what I think is interesting about this digital scene, this place that we are in this time that we're living in. It turns out that during the early days of theater, there was an encore, and everybody knows what an encore is. You clap your hands, and then people come out on stage and they sing another song for you, or they do something. But it turns out that's not the way it used to be. The way it used to be is that an encore was, in the French, it means again now, right? And people would start clapping their hands, and after a song, and then the actors would stop what they were doing and they would sing the song again. So, you know, the production's moving along, they sing a song, it's a happy song, everybody's like, hey, that's an awesome song, because it was a little bit more of a boisterous place, right? We love that song. Sing it again, we want to hear it again. And they would do this repeatedly, and the thought that occurred to me is they did this so they could remember the song. Not only so that they could be entertained again, but that they could remember the song, so when they were walking home or out in the fields farming or going back to their pubs or whatever it is they were doing, they could sing the song again and share it with their friends. They had no way to record. In fact, they interrupted Enrico Caruso at the Met 19 times to sing one aria once, and the Met actually banned encores. This was in the early 1900s, because it wore him out. He just got so tired, right? And he couldn't really finish the rest of the thing. I'm exhausted, I'm done, I'm out of here, right? And so that's what it was for a long time. They had the encore as a way of remembering, right? This is a photo right around the time of when people started to be able to record video for home consumption. There are two adorable people in that picture, and two of them are no longer here. But one of them's here, and this is my dad. And Dad was he was an early adopter of 8mm video. Right, so if anybody knows what that is, it's that you had a little camera and you made this 8mm film. You had to get it developed, and you'd show it at home on a big screen. And it was meant for home consumption. It was meant for mom and dad to actually record their kids growing up and doing that kind of thing. Right. Then you get to this guy, Professor Deb Roy. He's a professor at MIT. In right around 2006, 2007, actually earlier, he reported it in 2007. He and his wife had a baby. And from the time that baby came home till the time the baby was 3 years old, he recorded everything that happened in the house. Everything. This is the difference, right, between then and now, encore and everything. And then I want to take it one little step. This just happens to be a photo of me giving a talk somewhere, and this is a public photo. I'm aware that it should be online. I'm aware that it's okay and that people might see it. This is a photo that I didn't even know existed. One of them is me, that I didn't even know existed until my friend Mark, who's not even in the picture, posted it online and tagged me, right? So this picture I didn't know existed. It's online. I untagged myself because I didn't really want it there. And I do recognize the irony of actually showing it to you all on a recording. But nonetheless, not only have we moved in 150 years or so from not being able to record anything to being able to record everything, but actually things that were not really recorded are now actually coming out as being something that's recorded in public. So it's actually quite a different time that we're living in. And it's that difference that I think opens up a space for us to consider what the opportunities are. And it's that difference that I want to actually get to as we go forward. I want to give you an example of what it means to do social science work without actually having explained all of social science. So I'm going to ask a question that says, what does a cow being arrested, a cow who eventually will go to slaughter, being arrested as a drunk in Seattle in 1967 and traveling today have in common? One thing. Anybody? What they have in common is the underlying structure of power and control and autonomy and agency and authority. They all are the same, it turns out. In fact, I could make an argument, and I have, that a cow being led to slaughter because of Temple Grandin's work is actually being treated better than a person traveling today through the airport. Right? The cow being led to slaughter the system has been designed to minimize the amount of fear and consternation for the cow for a variety of cow reasons, right? Whereas the going through the airport structure has actually been designed to heighten the amount of fear and consternation and trauma that you have going through the airport. I can make the case that, and the reason I can make this case is because of the guy in the middle here. James Bradley did an ethnography of it's called You Owe Yourself a Drunk, and in 1967 he actually looked at the structure of what it is to be arrested as a drunk on the streets in Seattle in 1967, and to be arrested and confined and contained and brought through the justice system. It's actually very similar to traveling today in terms of your bodily authority, how much agency you have and when you can move, when you know you're going to move, how irritated you are when it says delayed and it doesn't tell you why, and then they say, oh, it's going to be in 10 minutes, and then it's not in 10 minutes, right? That kind of thing is very similar to actually being arrested. Now, I only tell you this story because it's these underlying patterns that we're going to see a little bit later on, right? And it's the social scientists that allow us to make these kinds of pattern recognitions, if you will. And if the airlines were clever and they listened to me on this particular topic, and I've worked with some of the firms that work with them, right? If they listened to me, they'd redesign these systems. They'd redesign these systems so it's not like being arrested and it's not like a cow to slaughter, right? And that's what we try to do, is we try to figure out how to redesign systems based on the patterns that we actually see. We're in this digital scene, right? S-C-E-N-E scene. We're in this digital scene, and I'm going to argue that everything is going digital, right? Everything's moving along. It's all digital. You can see things that are obvious to you, music and movies and writing letters and stuff like that. That's all very digital, absolutely. There's other things that aren't quite so obvious, right? Parking is going digital, kind of like Airbnb in Palo Alto. You can actually rent out your driveway because of the digitization of location and payments, right? So you can rent your driveway so somebody can come and park in your driveway, pay you. There's a dearth of parking spaces. But you technically kind of still own your driveway, right? But in San Francisco, you can sell your spot, right, on the street, because if you're parked on the street and it's a spot and there's not a lot of parking, you can actually, anybody want my spot? Right, $5. And then you'll wait and then somebody will come and take your spot. So you can sell something you don't actually have, and you don't even have the rights to actually owning the spot. It's just actually the moment that says you can sell your spot, right? And so it's a little informal economy thing going on there. But lots of stuff is actually turning digital, and one of the things that's actually happening with lots of things going digital is that it's making things that used to be visible invisible, and things that used to be invisible more visible. So it's flip-flopping what we actually know and understand. So banking is a good example of that. The notion of money, right, that used to be gold and then cash, and now it's just bitcoins, right, which aren't really coins, and they're barely bits, but they're bits, the notion of the abstraction, the invisibility of what money is, and the invisibility of what counts as currency is actually changing kind of significantly. And clearly, there's lots of opportunity in this space. There's also lots of regulation and pushback, right? Some things are going to be deemed by certain governments as being not a legal form of tender, but that's maybe not going to stop so many people from doing these, using these kinds of capabilities, right? So a lot is actually going digital, and it's going digital in its breadth in terms of many things happening simultaneously. We'll talk about more, but it's also going digital in terms of its depth, right? This is a snapshot of data that companies like Axiom and other companies have on you, individuals. They have 3,000 data items per person, up to, right, for hundreds of millions of people on a going forward basis. So on any one person, they have things, and you were meant to be able to read all of this, right? You weren't. But the number of baths you have in your home, right? It gets pretty detailed. It knows if you're a veteran. It knows what your religious affiliations are. It knows if you're practicing in religion. It knows whether you can afford certain products, you use credit cards, what your buying activities are, whether you have diabetes, are you a frequent flyer. It gathers all this information and sells it to a variety of places. So these data that exist, they exist on individuals, right? And I'm going to argue you don't have access to it. You probably should, but you don't, right? Also, everything else is going digital at the same time, and it's changing all the institutions that we have. So things like journalism are changing, things like religion are changing, all of this stuff is changing, and you know that. I don't have to belabor the point. I'm just old enough where I didn't have to learn how to use a slide rule, but I did have to learn how to read a map, right? And people don't have to learn how to read a map now. And in fact, not only don't you have to, it actually alleviates the burden of having to actually read a map as you go, because you have this faintly creepy authoritative female voice that actually tells you where to go as you drive, right? And I can actually imagine, right, that it would be better if it was my mom's voice, right? Because that would be awesome, right? It would be awesome. I have some recordings of Mom, as you know, right? And it would be great for having to have some sound engineer sort of, resurrect her voice in ways that she would talk to me, right? And that would make me feel comfortable, because she would say things like, honey, it says that you should turn right at the next intersection, right? And I'd be, oh, all right, Mom, let's do that, right? And it would feel more comfortable to me than this voice, turn right, 500 feet, right? Which I don't particularly like. I know people do. I just don't like it. I would prefer Mom. The thing is that we can imagine those differences. That's the thing. And if you can imagine those differences these days, I'm going to argue you can make them. The things that people can imagine now, they can actually build. And because they can imagine them, they can build them. Because they can build them, they become real. Because they become real, it changes what it means to actually be alive in this day and age, and it changes what it means to be digital. And so I'm going to actually shift us from the digital scene, D-I-G-I-S-C-E-N-E, to the Digocene, right? So my friend Ken and I are pretty much arguing that we're entering a new era, right? A new era in the lived experience of humanity. It's happened before, right? Before the Industrial Revolution, there wasn't, right? I'm going to argue that, and it's a pretty good claim, right? So you can poke arrows at me later. But we're going to argue we're moving into a new era and that we've just started, right? And that we're moving into this new era of digital living or digital bits where there's a lot of information and all of those data and all of those bits are actually impacting how we think, how we live, how we interact, how we work, how we govern ourselves. And what's fundamentally different is that bits are different than atoms. Bits have these attributes. Scarcity is not one of them any longer. A lot of what we do is based on scarcity. A lot of our government, a lot of our society, a lot of our rules are based on scarce resources and managing scarce resources. Bits aren't necessarily scarce, right? They're not necessarily rival. A lot of economics is based on rivalry. If you have one good, I can't have it. But in digital bits, I mean, we can all have the same copy, as the movie and music industry knows pretty much to their chagrin, right? That, if I have a copy, you can have 10 copies, and so can all your friends, right? So they're not rival any longer, right? They're immediately distributable, right? You can magnify them. You can actually, they're fungible. They're like money in some way. You can actually take music and movies and books and other things that you do, and you can run analytics across all of these different sort of categories, if you will, and make category errors and look for things that humans are technically really good at, right? So if Patrick and I know each other well, I can sit there and say, oh, you like that song? You know what? You actually might like this book, right? And I can actually make that connection because of something that it was, in there, something that I know about Patrick, something that I know about the book, something that I know about the song. I'm not even sure I can reflect on what it is, but I can say, I think you might like this, right? And sometimes I'll be right? Maybe more often than not if we know each other well, right? But sometimes I might be wrong, right? And then I'll adjust and move on, right? You can do all of this in the digital world, and the digital world can do it for you. You can't do it, and you can do new things. It's not only that the bits occur, it's that they're all connected, and that's been implicit in everything that I've said all the way through. It's the fact that you can connect music data with movie data, with journalism data, with book data, and you can run algorithms, and you can actually find other people, and you can find other institutions, and you can actually figure out how to hack a thing, right? And then share it with everybody so that they can hack it too, right? There's all of this is enabled by all of these technologies that have now become fairly commonplace, we think, right? Sure, there's high-end stuff that not everybody can make, right? It's very difficult to make a microprocessor at 14 nanometers, it turns out. 14 nanometers is small, right? But even these parts are becoming increasingly commodified, right? Where you find processing capabilities around, and you see it happening. The Arduinos, Raspberry Pi, the makers, right, are actually pulling these things together to provide basic computing capabilities on a going forward basis. And then the reason it can actually drive and magnify so much, of course, is because of networks, right? It's because they're not thinking linearly any longer. They're thinking in networks. And when you think in networks, you're thinking according to power laws, right, which we know.